The year was 1986. After a tragic loss, the Belmont family, Father Richard, and his two daughters Lena and Maddie moved into a quiet two-story home in the woods of Bradford, Massachusetts. It was old, but charming. The kind of place that whispered promises of a fresh start. The walls creaked, sure, but to Richard, that was just part of the charm. What he didn't know was that this house had a secret that would tear his family apart. Lena, just 15, tried to adjust to the new life. She missed her mother, but hoped the change of scenery would help. Maddie, only 11, was too young to understand the weight of grief. The girls decorated their rooms, filled the silence with music, and tried to ignore the unease that sometimes crept in after sunset. But it was there, an itch in the back of the neck, a sense that they weren't truly alone. And they weren't. It started with faint noises, scratches behind the bedroom walls, soft thuds in the attic, and the unmistakable creak of floorboards when no one was upstairs. Richard dismissed them as the natural settling of the old house, but Lena wasn't so sure. One night, as she sat at her desk doing homework, she heard a rhythmic tapping, 3 knocks, then silence, then again 3 knocks, always 3. She called for her father, but by the time he entered the room, the noise had stopped. "Pipes," he said. "This place is ancient." But the sounds returned, more frequent, more deliberate. Maddie began to complain about her toys moving. Overnight, a doll that had been on the dresser would be on the floor by morning, facing the wall. At first, Lena thought Maddie was just playing games, until she woke up one night to find that same doll on her own pillow, staring at her. Still, no one suspected the truth. Someone had already made the house their home. One chilly evening, while brushing her hair, Lena caught something strange in the mirror. Just behind her shoulder, a figure, faint, almost like a smudge, stood motionless. She spun. Around, heart pounding, but nothing was there. The hallway behind her was empty. Maybe it was her mind playing tricks. Maybe it was the grief. But it happened again 2 nights later. This time, she saw a face. Pale. Watching. She told Richard, but he laughed nervously. "Ghost stories already?" he teased. But Lena wasn't joking. She started avoiding mirrors, even covering them with sheets. Maddie, meanwhile, claimed she was talking to someone new, a boy in the walls who knew her name. Richard brushed it off as a child's imagination, but Lena felt the tension tightening. The house felt colder, heavier, the kind of cold that didn't come from outside. And still, the knocking continued. 3 taps, every night, closer now. Late one night, Lena woke up drenched in sweat. The air in her room was still, but something felt wrong, like the silence had weight. Then she heard it. A whisper. Faint, but unmistakable. It came from beneath her floorboards. She pressed her ear to the ground, trembling. There it was again, a boy's voice, humming. Not a tune she recognized, just a low, steady hum, as if someone were trying to lull her to sleep, or to something worse. The next morning, she ripped the rug away, hoping to find an explanation. Loose boards, animals, anything. But the wood was solid. Richard scolded her for damaging the floor. She tried to explain, but he refused to listen. "We came here to heal," he said, "not to chase shadows." That afternoon, Maddie's drawings changed. No more rainbows or houses. Now she drew a pale boy with dark eyes, hiding behind walls, watching from vents. "He says he lives here too," Maddie whispered. Lena didn't sleep that night. A week later, Lena opened her closet to find something chilling. A note, scribbled in childlike handwriting, tucked between her sweaters. It read, "I'm watching you." Her heart stopped. She ran to Richard, shaking, note in hand. He examined it with a frown, then sighed. "Is this your idea of a joke, Lena?" "Maddie, can't spell like that." Lena insisted it wasn't her, but Richard, overwhelmed by work and grief, refused to believe something sinister could be happening in his own home. The next day, Maddie found another note, this time on her pillow. "Let's play tonight. Come alone." That evening, she waited in the hallway with her flashlight, convinced it was a game. Lena caught her just in time. "He said to come through the closet," Maddie whispered. Her voice was flat, emotionless. Lena searched the closet, thoroughly. That's when she noticed something odd. Air flowing behind the rear wall. She knocked on it. Hollow. There was more to this house than they knew. Much more. Lena couldn't ignore it anymore. When Richard left for work the next morning, she grabbed a flashlight, a screwdriver, and returned to her closet. She pried at the panel in the back. To her horror, it came loose, revealing a narrow, dark crawl space. Cold air rushed out, heavy with the smell of dust and something else. Something. Sour. Heart-pounding, she leaned in, shining the light through the opening. Inside, the beam caught something reflective, metal. Then something else. An old blanket, a half-eaten apple, a pile of crumpled wrappers. Someone had been living there. She scrambled back, breath quick and shallow. Who? How? Why? She slammed the closet shut and dragged her dresser in front of it. But the fear didn't leave. That night she kept a knife under her pillow. Maddie was too young to understand, but Lena now knew. The noises weren't imagination, the whispers, the notes. They weren't accidents. Someone was watching them, hiding, waiting, and that someone was still inside the house. That night, the fear became unbearable. Lena lay in bed, eyes wide open, listening to every creak and tick of the old house. Sometime after midnight, she heard it, soft, steady breathing, not her own, not Maddie's. This was deep, slow, just outside her bedroom door. She froze, clutching the knife tighter beneath her pillow. Then came the sound of the doorknob rattling, gently, as if someone were testing it, trying not to make noise, trying to come in. She screamed. Richard stormed in seconds later, but there was no one in the hallway. No sign of forced entry, no open windows, nothing. But Lena knew what she heard, what she felt. The presence was real. Richard, visibly shaken, didn't have an explanation. For the first time, he didn't tell her she was imagining things. He started locking every door and window before bed. But locks didn't matter, because the thing stalking them wasn't coming from outside. It was already inside the walls. A few days passed in tense silence. Richard began sleeping with a baseball bat by the bed. Lena refused to be alone in any room. But Maddie seemed calm. Too calm. She spoke less, drew more. And her drawings grew darker. Stick figures with hollow eyes, people behind bars, red scribbles pouring from walls. Lena begged her father to take it seriously, but he only said, "It's just her way of processing grief." Then came the moment that shattered everything. While putting away laundry, Lena looked up and caught a glint in the corner of her eye, the air vent above her bed. Something moved. Slowly, she stepped onto a chair and peered inside. Two eyes stared back, wide, human, watching. She fell backwards, screaming, sending the laundry flying. Richard ran in, but by the time he removed the vent cover, it was empty. Just darkness, dust, nothing. But Lena had seen it. Someone had been there. Someone had been watching them sleep, and now there was no more denying it. The next morning, Richard took action. He couldn't deny the fear in Lena's eyes or the strange drawings Maddie continued to make. With a flashlight in hand and determination in his voice, he opened the panel Lena had discovered in her closet. He squeezed through the narrow space, crawling on hands and knees through dust and spider webs. What he found made his stomach twist. A small makeshift nest, blankets, food wrappers. Even some of their missing items, Maddie's hairbrush, Lena's missing sock, an old family photo. Then he saw the writing on the wall. Dozens of messages scrawled in pencil and dirt. "I live here. You can't see me. We're a family now." One sentence repeated over and over. "Lena is mine." He backed out of the space, pale, breathless, and trembling. He didn't want to scare the girls, but the truth was undeniable. Someone had been living inside their house. Watching them, studying them, pretending to belong, and whoever it was, they were becoming bolder. That night, no one slept. Richard nailed the closet shut and checked every door, every window, every lock. Lena stayed curled up with Maddie in her bed, jumping at every sound, but it didn't matter, because around 3 a.m. the hallway light flickered on by itself. Footsteps, soft, slow, moved past their door. Lena held her breath, heart racing. Then, a creak, the floorboard just outside the room. Richard whispered, "Stay here," and stepped into the hallway with the bat raised. Seconds later, a scream shattered the silence. Lena rushed out just in time to see Richard frozen at the end of the hall. The attic door was wide open, and below it, on the last step of the drop-down ladder, stood a boy. Thin, filthy, skin pale like paper, eyes dark and wild. He didn't speak, he just smiled. Then he turned and vanished into the crawl space above. Richard slammed the ladder shut, locked it, and backed away. Shaking. This wasn't a ghost. It was real, and it had a name. They just didn't know it yet. The next morning, Richard called the police. Officers arrived, searched the house, and found undeniable evidence. Nests in the crawl spaces, food remnants, fingerprints on inside vents, and even shoe prints leading from the attic to the basement. But the intruder was gone, disappeared without a trace. One officer pulled Richard aside and said quietly, "We've seen this before. Squatters. Sometimes worse." As they combed through the hidden spaces, Lena found it first, a spot behind the basement wall, covered in old insulation. Scratched into the wooden beam with what looked like a nail were 3 haunting words. "Dan is here." That night, Lena had a dream. The boy was sitting at their dinner table, holding hands with Maddie and smiling at her, like he belonged. When she woke up, Maddie was gone from her bed. They found her downstairs, standing barefoot in the kitchen, talking softly to no one. "He said we're safe now," she whispered. "He said he just wanted a sister." That was the night Richard decided they had to leave. But Dan wasn't done yet. With trembling hands, Richard packed their belongings. The plan was simple. One more night, then they'd leave the house behind forever. Lena stayed close to Maddie, refusing to let her out of her sight. Every corner of the house felt like it was breathing, alive with tension. Richard slept with the lights on, the bat beside him, waiting for the slightest sound. At 2:47 a.m. it came. Not a knock, not a whisper, a scream. Lena bolted upright and rushed to Maddie's room, but her sister was gone. Again. Panic set in. She ran to Richard's room, only to find him unconscious on the floor, blood on his temple, a trail of smeared footprints leading down the stairs. She followed them into the kitchen, then the basement. At the bottom of the steps, in the cold silence, stood Maddie, and behind her, in the shadows, Dan. His eyes were wide, empty, his body trembling. In one hand he held a knife, in the other, a teddy bear. "I just wanted to be part of the family," he whispered. Then everything went dark. When Lena awoke, she was in a hospital bed. Her head throbbed and her arms were bruised. The last thing she remembered was lunging between Dan and Maddie just before the lights cut out. A police officer sat beside her. "You're safe now," he said. "We got him." Dan had been found in the crawlspace beneath the stairs, curled up in a fetal, position whispering Maddie's name. He didn't resist arrest. He didn't speak to anyone. But the evidence was overwhelming. His fingerprints, his writing, his makeshift bedding hidden throughout the house. He had been living there for months, watching them, planning, waiting for his chance. The officers recovered a notebook. Inside were pages of obsession, drawings of Lena sleeping, detailed maps of the house, and journal entries that chilled even the investigators. She smiled at me today. I think she loves me. Richard is in the way. Soon he'll be gone. Dan wasn't a ghost. He was worse. A boy with no boundaries, no remorse, and a need to belong, no matter the cost. Dan's trial gripped the entire town. Reporters flooded Bradford and neighbors stared in disbelief. How could a boy, barely 16, have pulled off something so horrifying, so calculated for so long? In court, Dan sat expressionless, shackled and silent. His defense claimed he was mentally unstable, a product of a broken system, abandoned by every adult who should have helped him. But the prosecution painted a darker picture. Obsession, manipulation, and intent. Then came the most disturbing evidence, a series of recordings found inside the Belmont house. Dan had hidden a small tape recorder in Lena's room. For weeks, he had been capturing her every move. Breathing, crying, even conversations. When the recordings were played, the courtroom fell silent. One tape ended with his voice, soft and trembling, saying, "She'll understand someday, we're meant to be together." Lena broke down on the stand. Maddie refused to speak. Richard testified with clenched fists, eyes full of guilt. But the verdict was clear. Dan wasn't insane. He was dangerous. And now he was finally locked away. Even after Dan was sentenced, the Belmonts couldn't return to that house. It stood empty for months, then was quietly sold, its dark history erased by a fresh coat of paint and a different family name. But for Lena, the trauma didn't vanish so easily. She had nightmares for years, visions of Dan staring through vents, standing silently at the foot of her bed, whispering from inside the walls. Maddie struggled the most. She became withdrawn, afraid of closed doors and dark corners. She no longer drew at all. Therapy helped slowly, but the innocence that once filled their home was gone. Richard blamed himself for not believing sooner, for choosing peace over truth. He moved them far from Bradford, changed jobs, and tried to start over, but the past clung to them like a shadow. What haunted them most wasn't just what Dan had done. It was how close he had come to becoming part of their lives, how he'd eaten their food, watched their routines, learned their secrets, and they hadn't even known he existed until it was almost too late. 2 years after Dan's conviction, a letter arrived. It was addressed to Maddie, written in shaky handwriting. Richard opened it without hesitation. Inside were 3 pages of disturbing calmness. Dan apologized, not for the fear or for the violence, but for leaving without saying goodbye. He wrote as if he had been part of their family. He called Maddie his little sister and Lena his first love. He spoke of memories that weren't his to claim, moments he had watched from the shadows and twisted into delusions. Richard immediately contacted the authorities. The letter violated court orders, but it wasn't the last. Every few months, another envelope appeared, sometimes to their new address, sometimes forwarded from Bradford. It meant only one thing. Dan knew where they were, even from prison. Lena refused to read them. Maddie cried for hours after each arrival, and Richard, now constantly looking over his shoulder, realized a chilling truth. Dan might be behind bars, but his presence had never really left. In the years that followed, more details emerged about Dan's past. Details that explained how a child became a stalker hiding in walls. His mother had died when he was young. His father was abusive, in and out of jail. He was bounced between relatives and foster homes, slipping through the cracks of a broken system. Teachers remembered him as quiet but off. Neighbors recalled strange behavior, talking to himself, peering into windows, breaking into sheds. But no one had ever intervened. No one had asked why. Investigators began to suspect the Belmonts weren't his first victims. Other families, too, had reported missing food, moved items and strange noises in the walls, but they had chalked it up to bad wiring or animals. Dan had been there, watching, practicing. It became clear that Dan didn't just want to hurt. He wanted to belong, to insert himself into families, to rewrite his own story by stealing someone else's. The Belmonts were just the ones who saw it through to the end. Others hadn't even realized they'd been haunted, until it was already over. Years later, the Belmonts tried to move on. New town, new names, a new life. But the scars lingered. Lena, now an adult, still double-checks locks before bed. Maddie sleeps with a nightlight. And Richard, despite everything, still blames himself for not seeing the truth sooner. The house in Bradford still stands, painted over, renovated, quiet again, but the locals say it never feels quite right. Renters don't stay long. Children say they hear someone walking in the attic. One family even moved out in the middle of the night, refusing to talk about what happened because something remains. Not Dan, but the echo of what he did. The walls remember. This story is real. It's not about ghosts or legends. It's about a boy who wasn't seen until it was too late. And about a family who thought they were starting over, only to find that evil doesn't always knock on the door. It sometimes lives inside it. If stories like this shake you the way they shook us, subscribe now. Turn on the bell so you never miss another case that might be happening closer to you than you think.